April 5th, 2006, USP Pollock, Louisiana. One man, one shipping pallet. 12 hours of freedom. And the craziest part, he mailed himself out like a package. Richard Lee McNair was serving 2 life sentences plus 30 years for murder at a federal maximum security prison. On the morning of April 5th, he climbed into a stack of mailbags in the prison workshop and was shipped straight to freedom. But this isn't just a story about hiding in a box. It's about months of planning to land that mailroom job. A traffic stop where he talked his way past a police officer who knew an escaped convict was nearby. And a year and a half of outsmarting authorities across 2 countries. 10 months after his escape, an officer pulled him over on a Louisiana back road. McNair talked for 10 minutes. He convinced the cop he was just a construction worker out for a jog. The officer let him drive away. 2 hours later, that same officer learned he had just released America's most wanted fugitive. This is how one of the most ingenious prison escapes in American history succeeded. Because a killer could talk his way out of anything, Richard Lee McNair wasn't always a prisoner. He was a United States Air Force sergeant, polite, intelligent, well-spoken, the kind of man neighbors trusted to watch their house while they were on vacation. But McNair was living a double life. By day, he served his country on an Air Force base in North Dakota. He wore the uniform. He followed orders. He was exactly the kind of quiet, reliable airman nobody noticed in a crowd. By night, he became somebody else entirely. He burglarized businesses across the state. Small offices, warehouses, grain elevators. He was careful. He was methodical. He took only what he could carry and disappeared before morning. Nothing violent at first, just theft. Quick cash. He thought he had it all under control. How does a decorated military man become a burglar for McNair? It started small. A little extra money, a little thrill, a little proof that he was smarter than everyone around him. Then it grew, and then one night, it spiraled completely out of control. February 1987. McNair broke into a grain warehouse office in Minot, North Dakota, late at night. He thought the place was empty. It wasn't. 2 men surprised him inside. One was a security guard doing his rounds. The other was Jerry Thies, a truck driver who had stopped in to drop off paperwork. Before heading home, 3 men, 1 dark room, 1 loaded gun. McNair panicked. He had brought a weapon for intimidation, not murder. Now he was cornered. Now he had witnesses. Now he was thinking about the 2 life sentences hanging over his head if he got caught. He made the worst choice of his life. He opened fire. The security guard was hit but survived. Jerry Thies wasn't as lucky. The truck driver died at the scene. A working man doing an ordinary job was gone in seconds. His wife would get a phone call before sunrise. His children would grow up without him, all because Richard Lee McNair didn't want to go to prison for burglary. What kind of man shoots 2 strangers in a warehouse to save himself? The kind of man who would spend the next 20 years trying to escape the cage he had earned. Police caught him within days. At trial, the evidence was overwhelming. Witnesses, ballistics, McNair's own confession during interrogation. The judge sentenced him to 2 life sentences plus additional time for attempted murder. No possibility of parole. He would die behind bars. That was the promise. It was a promise Richard Lee McNair refused to accept. Because before the famous mailbag escape of 2006, he had already broken out of custody twice. Most prisoners never escape once. McNair would do it 3 times, from 3 completely different types of facilities. The first escape came almost immediately after his arrest. The year was 1988. McNair was being held at a police station in Minot. He was handcuffed. He was waiting for transfer to state prison. A detective stepped out of the interview room for just a moment. That was all the opening McNair needed. He had smuggled a small container of lip balm in his pocket. He squeezed the slick gel onto his wrists. He used it as lubricant. He began working his hand through the handcuffs, twisting, pulling, straining. The metal cut deep into his skin. He didn't care. One hand slipped free, then the other. Could you force your own hand through a metal handcuff while your skin tore open? McNair did it without making a sound. He ran to the window. 3rd floor, 30 feet straight down to concrete. He didn't hesitate for even a second. He jumped. He landed hard. He broke bones in his feet and legs. He got up anyway. He ran. Police caught him the same day, hobbling through the streets of Minot. He was injured. He was exhausted. He was barely able to stand. His first escape lasted less than 6 hours, but it taught him something important. Speed alone wasn't enough. Next time, he needed a real plan. The second escape came 4 years later, October 1992, North Dakota State Penitentiary. McNair and another inmate named Carlin Dion Jensen had been studying the prison for months. They noticed a weakness in the ventilation system running above the cell block. They gathered tools a little at a time, pieces of metal, strips of cloth, anything useful. They worked at night. They worked in silence. They hid their progress during inspections. They were patient in a way that most prisoners never learned to be. On October 9th, 1992, they made their move. They pried open a vent cover. They climbed into the ductwork. They crawled through narrow metal tunnels above the sleeping prison. They pushed through to the roof. They dropped down to the ground outside the walls. They were out. The two men split up immediately. Better odds that way. If one got caught, the other still had a chance. Jensen was captured within days. McNair wasn't. McNair stayed free for 10 months. He drifted across the country. He changed his appearance constantly. He grew a beard. He wore glasses. He altered the way he walked. He used fake names at every stop. He worked odd jobs for cash under the table. He never stayed in one place long enough for anyone to remember him. How do you vanish in a country of 300 million people? McNair figured it out through trial and error, one close call at a time. He eventually made his way to Grand Island, Nebraska. Someone there recognized his face from a wanted poster and called the tip line. Officers surrounded the house where he was staying. This time, there was no window to jump from, no handcuffs to slip, no ventilation shaft to crawl through. McNair was back in custody. Federal authorities decided he was too dangerous for a state facility. He was transferred into the federal prison system, first to Leavenworth, then eventually to the most secure prison in the United States, ADX Florence in Colorado, the Supermax. At ADX Florence, McNair lived in total isolation, 23 hours a day inside a tiny concrete cell, no contact with other inmates, no view of the outside world, every movement monitored, every meal delivered through a slot in the steel door. Most men would have broken. McNair didn't. Instead, he did something nobody expected. He became quiet. He followed every rule. He caused no trouble. He filed no complaints. He stopped being a problem. Year after year, he was a model prisoner. Guards stopped watching him so closely. Administrators reviewed his file and saw a man who had finally accepted his fate. They lowered their guard. Have you ever watched a predator play dead? McNair was doing the same thing, waiting, watching, planning. In 2005, prison officials made a decision that would haunt them. They transferred McNair from ADX Florence down to USP Pollock in Louisiana. It was a reward for years of good behavior, a step down from Supermax to a standard high-security penitentiary. To the administrators, it was paperwork, a small change, a low risk. To McNair, it was a door cracking open. USP Pollock was tough, but it wasn't Supermax. Inmates had jobs. They moved between buildings. They handled tools and equipment. They had contact with the outside world through deliveries, shipments, and mail. For a man who had already escaped twice, every one of those things was a possibility. McNair immediately began studying the new facility. He memorized guard rotations. He mapped every hallway and every door. He learned which cameras worked and which were broken. He watched the delivery trucks come and go. He noticed who inspected them, how they were inspected, and what was never inspected at all. Then he applied for the job he really wanted, the prison industries program, specifically the mailbag repair unit. Here is how it worked. The United States Postal Service sent damaged canvas mailbags to federal prisons by the truckload. Inmates stitched them back together for pennies an hour. The finished bags were bundled, stacked on wooden pallets, and wrapped tightly in plastic shrink wrap. Then forklifts loaded the pallets onto outbound trucks headed back to postal facilities. Do you see where this is going? McNair saw it on his very first day. For months, he studied the shipping process from the inside. He watched the guards inspect the finished pallets. He timed every stage. He counted how many seconds each inspection took. He learned the schedule of every delivery truck, and he noticed the critical weakness. The guards only checked the outside of the pallets. They looked for obvious problems, bulges, loose wrapping, bags hanging off the edges. They never checked the inside of a shrink-wrapped stack. Why would they? The pallets were solid blocks of canvas, tightly bound, ready to ship. Unless, of course, someone had built a hollow space in the middle. McNair started building his escape pod in plain sight. He hollowed out a cavity in the center of a pallet, not near the top, where guards might notice, not near the bottom, where a forklift might crush him, right in the middle, behind layers of bags on every side. He used the mailbags themselves as walls. He created a small chamber just big enough for a man to curl up inside. He tested the design over weeks. He climbed in and out. He measured how long he could stay inside without overheating. He rehearsed every movement until it was automatic. He prepared a small survival kit, a bottle of water, a razor blade to cut himself out, a change of civilian clothes, a few hidden dollars. That was all. And he chose his date carefully. April 5th, 2006, a Wednesday, a normal shipping day. Nothing unusual, nothing that would draw attention. The plan was perfect, maybe too perfect. Do you think a man can really ship himself out of a federal prison without getting caught? Drop your prediction in the comments and subscribe to the channel, because what happens in the next 10 minutes is the most unbelievable part of this entire story. The morning of April 5th started like any other day at USP Pollock. McNair reported to his work assignment in the prison industries building at 7 a.m. He stitched mailbags. He joked with the other inmates. He was calm. He was relaxed. Nothing about him suggested that within hours he would be gone forever. At approximately mid-morning, he made his move. While other inmates focused on their sewing machines, McNair slipped behind the stack of pallets he had prepared. He pulled aside the outer layer of shrink wrap. He climbed into the hollow chamber he had built. He sealed himself inside. Now he had to wait. Inside the pallet, the air was thick and hot. The space was tiny. He couldn't stretch. He couldn't turn, so he could barely breathe. He lay curled in the darkness, listening to the sounds of the prison around him. Footsteps, voices, the hum of sewing machines, the beep of a forklift in the distance. He was inches away from guards and fellow inmates, and none of them had any idea he was there. How long could you stay perfectly still in a box knowing one cough would end your life? McNair did it for hours. At some point in the afternoon, a forklift operator approached his pallet. McNair heard the engine getting closer. He felt the metal forks slide under the wooden base. He felt the entire pallet lift smoothly into the air. He was moving. The forklift carried him across the warehouse, out through the loading bay, onto a waiting delivery truck. He could hear other pallets being loaded around him. He could hear the truck engine idling. He could hear voices outside, guards signing off on the shipment. Then the truck doors closed. Darkness, silence, and the low rumble of the engine coming to life. The truck started moving. McNair felt it roll forward. He felt it pass through the outer checkpoint. He felt it accelerate onto the open highway. For the first time in nearly 20 years, he was outside the walls of a prison. But he wasn't free yet. The truck drove for miles before pulling into a private warehouse off prison grounds. The driver parked, shut off the engine, and walked away for his break. McNair waited. He listened. He made sure nobody was close. Then he cut his way out. He used his razor blade to slice through the shrink wrap from the inside. He pushed the mailbags aside. He climbed down from the pallet onto the concrete floor. He stretched his cramped, aching muscles. He changed into civilian clothes. He took his first truly free breath in almost 20 years. Meanwhile, back at USP Pollock, nobody knew he was gone. The afternoon inmate count began on schedule. Guards moved through the cell blocks calling names. When they got to McNair, there was no answer. They recounted. Still missing. They searched his cell. Empty. They searched the work areas. Nothing. It took hours for prison officials to understand what had actually happened. When they finally realized that a prisoner had shipped himself out inside a pallet of mailbags, they were stunned, embarrassed, furious. The manhunt began immediately. Federal marshals were called in. Louisiana State Police set up roadblocks. McNair's photograph was sent to every law enforcement agency within 500 miles. But McNair was already long gone. He was walking down a quiet rural road outside of Ball, Louisiana, trying to look like an ordinary man out for exercise. He had no car, no identification, no cell phone. He was running on nothing but his wits and a head start measured in hours. Then he had the encounter that would make him a legend. A Ball police officer named Carl Bordelon was patrolling that rural road when he spotted a man jogging along the shoulder. The man was sweating heavily in the Louisiana heat. He looked out of place. Bordelon knew a manhunt was underway for an escaped prisoner from USP Pollock. He pulled over to check. What happened next was captured on the officer's dashboard camera. The footage still exists today. Bordelon got out of his patrol car and approached the jogger. He asked for identification. The man said he didn't have any. He said his name was Robert Jones. He said he was a construction worker from out of town, just getting some exercise on his lunch break. Bordelon was suspicious. He had the description of the escaped convict on his radio. He was looking right at a man who matched it closely. He ran the name Robert Jones through dispatch. He asked more questions. McNair answered every single one calmly, confidently, without hesitation. He described his fake construction job in detail. He named streets. He described buildings. He explained why he was so far from anything on foot. He joked about being out of shape. He made small talk about the heat. For 10 full minutes, Richard Lee McNair stood on the shoulder of a Louisiana road, talking casually to a police officer who was actively hunting him. And that officer believed every word. How does a murderer stay that calm while a cop is checking his story? How does he lie so smoothly that a trained officer doesn't feel a single red flag? The answer reveals something disturbing about how McNair's mind worked under pressure. Carl Bordelon let him go. He got back in his patrol car. He drove away. He left America's most wanted fugitive standing on the side of the road, free to walk into the woods and disappear. 2 hours later, Bordelon learned the truth. The real Richard Lee McNair matched the description of the jogger perfectly. He had just released the man he had been sent to catch. The dashcam footage became famous. It is still shown to police officers today as a training tool, a warning, a lesson in how the most dangerous criminals don't always look the part. Sometimes they look like the guy jogging past your house. McNair vanished into the Louisiana wilderness. For the next 18 months, he became a ghost. He traveled thousands of miles. He crossed state lines. He stole vehicles when he needed them. He used fake names. He worked under the table for cash whenever he ran out. He slept in cheap motels, in abandoned barns, sometimes outdoors under the stars. He never stopped moving. Federal marshals chased him across the country. They followed leads in Texas, in Arkansas, in Mississippi. Every lead went cold. Every sighting turned out to be wrong. McNair was always one step ahead of the men chasing him. How do you catch a man who has already outsmarted 2 prisons and a manhunt? The marshals asked themselves that question for over a year with no good answer. He eventually made his way north, all the way to the Canadian border, and then across it. In Canada, McNair kept an even lower profile. He drifted through small towns. He took cash jobs in construction. He told people he was just passing through. Weeks turned into months. Months turned into a year. The manhunt started to lose momentum. The public forgot about him. The marshals never did. On October 24th, 2007, his luck finally ran out. A Royal Canadian Mounted Police officer was conducting a routine check in Campbellton, New Brunswick. McNair was driving a pickup truck. He was stopped for a minor traffic issue. The officer asked for identification. McNair didn't have any convincing documents. McNair tried the same trick that had worked on Carl Bordelon. He talked. He explained. He smiled. He tried to charm his way past the officer with calm confidence. This time, it didn't work. The RCMP officer pressed harder. He asked McNair to come to the station for fingerprinting. Within hours, the prints were run through international databases. The match came back fast. The quiet drifter in the pickup truck was Richard Lee McNair, America's most wanted fugitive, missing for 18 months. Finally, in custody, McNair didn't resist arrest. He actually joked with the officers. He said that if he had just buckled his seatbelt that day, they never would have had a reason to stop him, and he would have been in Mexico within a week. The chase was finally over. McNair was extradited back to the United States. His third escape was done. Prison officials were humiliated all over again. A prisoner had mailed himself out of a federal facility. He had talked his way past a police officer during an active manhunt. He had stayed free for over a year and a half. They were determined he would never get a fourth chance. He was transferred back to ADX Florence in Colorado, the Supermax, the same facility he had worked so hard to leave behind, back to 23 hours of solitary confinement every day. Concrete walls, steel doors, no windows, no contact with other inmates. Every movement watched. McNair remains there today. He is in his mid-60s now. Barring a miracle, he will die inside that cell. A senior United States Marshal who hunted him later admitted something unusual. He said he had developed a strange professional respect for McNair's intelligence and determination. Years after the capture, the Marshal and McNair actually exchanged letters. Strange conversations between hunter and prey. McNair wrote admiringly about the manhunt. The Marshal wrote with grudging amazement about the mailbag escape. But Richard Lee McNair holds a distinction no other prisoner in American history can claim. He is the only inmate ever known to have successfully escaped from a city jail, a state penitentiary, and a federal maximum security prison. 3 different facilities, 3 different security levels, 3 successful escapes. Nobody else has ever done it. Nobody. The mailbag escape remains one of the most creative prison breaks ever recorded. It required patience, planning, nerve, perfect execution. One guard checking the pallet too closely, one worker noticing the hollow space, one cough at the wrong moment. Any of those small things could have ended the whole plan in a second, but everything went right. The timing, the forklift, the empty warehouse, the head start, even the traffic stop on the road afterward. After his escape, USP Pollock overhauled its security procedures. The mailbag program was shut down permanently. Inmate work assignments near the perimeter were restricted. Pallet shipments were inspected from the inside as well as the outside. Security protocols were tightened across the entire federal prison system, all because one man climbed into a pile of canvas bags and was shipped to freedom. Today at ADX Florence, McNair paces the length of his cell, 23 steps from door to wall, 23 steps back, counting, always counting. Because a man who escaped 3 times never completely stops believing that lightning might strike a 4th time, his case is still taught in federal prison training programs. As an example of inmate ingenuity, as a warning about institutional failure, as proof that even the most secure facilities have weaknesses, if a patient enough mind looks long enough to find them. For 18 months, Richard Lee McNair was free. He saw mountains. He saw forests. He saw open sky. He traveled thousands of miles. He lived by his wits. He outsmarted almost everyone who came looking for him. Then one random traffic stop in a small Canadian town ended it all. And that brings us to the end of our story. If you liked it, don't forget to like and subscribe and activate the bell button so you can receive new videos.